Hello and welcome to Miniature Addiction Club. For my friend's birthday, I decided to make them their favourite food in miniature form. I started off by turning this used eyeshadow palette and a paper clip into a cast iron pan. First, I trimmed off the rounded ends of the paper clip to use as the handles. I attached them using Milliput, which is a 2-part epoxy putty. I mixed even amounts of the 2 parts together and formed a small strip on either side of the pan, smoothing the edges down. Then I could press the paperclip handles into the putty, and I let it dry upside down so that the handles would stay in the upright position. Once it was dry, I painted the entire piece with black gesso. On my second coat, I added a tiny bit of baking soda to the paint to give it more texture, a trick I learnt from Shira from Queen City Minis. For the mussels, I'm using real tiny shells that I was gifted that are the perfect size for this project. To make the inside part, I mixed some orange, pink and translucent polymer clay together and rolled out some small blobs. I attached them to the shells using some liquid Fimo gel, and I used my small dotting tool to press them down. Then I went in with some watered down acrylic paint on a tiny brush to add some more definition. And spoiler alert, I was working on the oysters at the same time and I didn't realise when filming that they were in the shot, so please go ahead and pretend that you can't see them, as we'll get to them shortly. To make the broth or soup or whatever the mussels are cooked in, I used liquid Fimo, which I coloured with a little chalk pastel. I arranged the mussels in the pan, then I added little pieces of dried green moss as the herbs or garnish. Then I baked it in the oven. I was a little apprehensive about putting the painted metal and epoxy clay in the oven, but it was totally fine. For the next item on the menu, I took this old metal dish I had in my collection and painted it with white nail polish to look like an enamel plate. Now unfortunately I didn't have any real miniature oyster shells for this one, so I'm making each one by hand. To do this, I rolled out pieces of scrap clay in a variety of neutral colours. I used some tan, black, white and granite and put them through the pasta machine before tearing up little pieces to stack together. I took the layered piece and roughly cut it into a teardrop shape and thinned out the edges. Then I rolled it in the palm of my hand with a dotting tool. I pinched the top end of the teardrop together and repeated this process. Once I had made a bunch of them, I placed them on some tin foil and baked them in the oven. Once they had cooled down, I brushed the inside of each shell with some pearlescent powder. This was a fun process, but it's not super noticeable in the final piece, so you could skip this part if you wanted to. To make the fleshy oyster part, I took some translucent polymer clay, and for this I'm using Primo Sculpey. I used my dotting tool to shape each one before baking. Once they had cooled down, I added a little watered down acrylic paint in black, brown and Payne's grey to define the edges. Then I added a little drop of Mod Podge Dimensional Magic to each one to give them a bit of a sheen and make them look more realistic. Then I realised I needed some lemon wedges, so I made a quick cane of a section of lemon. I made it larger than I needed it to be so that when I roll it out it shrinks down to the right scale. Let me know if you would like a more in-depth tutorial on making polymer clay canes. I sort of rushed through this as I didn't have very much yellow clay and I was trying to make it as quickly as I could so I could get it finished in time for my friend's birthday. I pressed down all of the sides of the cane before rolling it out into a snake. I usually find the ends get a bit messy and distorted, so I cut them off. The clearest part of the cane is usually in the middle, so I rolled that out even smaller to the size I wanted, and then I cut off several thin slices. I then used my small dotting tool to add some texture to each slice, highlighting each segment. I also patted down each one on top with some sandpaper to add a bit more texture. I cut some of them in half before baking and left others whole so that I could play around with different options later on. I always prefer to make more than what I need so I can pick and choose the best ones or have some left over for the next time I make something. It was just after this that I found an old lemon cane that I had made some time ago in my scrap clay box, so I didn't need to make one after all. But you know what they say, when life gives you lemons. Next, I had to make some ice for the platter, and this was really tricky. I tried a heap of different techniques, but but the most realistic method I could find was just to cut up a piece of hot glue gun stick. I mixed the ice cubes with some gloss Mod Podge, some Dimensional Magic, and some PVA glue, mixing it thoroughly so that all the pieces were coated evenly. Then I scooped the mixture out onto the platter, pressing it down to create an even bed to lay the oysters onto. I picked out the best oysters and pressed them into the ice and glue mixture while it was still wet. Then I went ahead and added the lemon wedges, using a bit more glue to make sure they're not going anywhere. To finish off the piece, I stuck each dish to a piece of wood along with a checkered cloth and some bread that I made. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.